There's a quiet power in words, a power so immense that empires have risen and fallen trying to control it. Think about it. What could be so threatening about a language that rulers would go to extraordinary lengths to erase it from history? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most overlooked tragedies, the deliberate silencing of 33 forbidden scripts and languages, each one a testament to cultures that refused to be forgotten. These aren't just lost alphabets or forgotten dialects. They're the echoes of entire worlds stamped out by conquerors who understood that language isn't just a tool for communication, it's the soul of a people. From the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia to the colonial edicts that reshaped continents, the story of these forbidden languages is a story of resistance. Imagine scribes hiding sacred texts in caves, mothers whispering forbidden lullabies to their children, entire communities risking everything to keep their words alive. Why? Because language carries identity, memory, and even rebellion. When an empire bans a script, it isn't just erasing letters, it's trying to erase a way of life. And yet, against all odds, fragments of these languages survive, waiting to be deciphered like coded messages from the past. This journey will take us to the front lines of a hidden war, one fought not with swords, but with ink and parchment. We'll uncover why the Assyrians feared the power of Aramaic, how Spanish colonizers tried to obliterate Nahuatl, and why Stalin's regime saw minority languages as a threat. But more than that, we'll meet the unsung heroes who kept these words alive against impossible odds. By the end, you'll never look at a dictionary the same way again, because every word we speak is a thread in the tapestry of human resilience. So, are you ready to hear the voices history tried to silence? Let's begin. The Assyrians were among the first to weaponize language suppression, but they weren't the last. When they conquered ancient Mesopotamia, they didn't just seize land, they targeted the very words people spoke. Aramaic, the lingua franca of trade and diplomacy, spread like wildfire among their subjects, and that terrified them. Why? Because language isn't just a way to barter goods or issue commands. It's a living archive of traditions, beliefs, and resistance. The Assyrians knew that if people kept speaking Aramaic, they'd also keep remembering their own gods, their own laws, their own stories. So they did what empires do. They tried to replace it. They imposed Akkadian as the language of power, chiseling their decrees into stone while dismissing Aramaic as the tongue of the conquered. But here's the twist: Aramaic refused to die. It thrived in whispers, in marketplaces, even in the very halls of Assyrian palaces. Scribes secretly penned letters in it. Merchants used it to negotiate behind their rulers' backs, and eventually it outlasted the empire that tried to erase it, becoming the dominant language of the region. This pattern repeats across history. Conquerors ban a script, and the banned script fights back. Take the Rosetta Stone, a slab of rock that became a key to unlocking hieroglyphs, a writing system the Ptolemaic dynasty had tried to marginalize. For centuries, hieroglyphs were dismissed as pagan symbols, their meaning lost until Napoleon's scholars cracked the code. Suddenly, Egypt's history spoke again, proving that even the most methodical silencing can't last forever. What's chilling is how modern these tactics feel. Colonial powers didn't just burn villages, they burned dictionaries. The British in India systematically replaced local scripts with English, not just for efficiency, but to reshape how people thought. Stalin banned minority languages in the Soviet Union, forcing entire communities to renounce their mother tongues or face punishment. In each case, the goal was the same: to sever people from their past and mold them into obedient subjects. Yet time and again, language survives in the margins on crumbling scrolls, in oral traditions, in the stubborn hearts of those who refuse to forget. So when we look at these forbidden scripts, we're not just seeing lost letters. We're seeing the fingerprints of resistance. Buried beneath the sands of modern-day Pakistan and India lies one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, the undeciphered script of the Harappans. Flourishing over 4,000 years ago along the banks of the Indus River, this civilization boasted sprawling cities, advanced drainage systems, and a trade network stretching from Mesopotamia to the Persian Gulf. But their writing, it's a ghost. Over 400 intricate symbols adorn seals, pottery, and tablets, yet no Rosetta Stone has emerged to crack their code. Was this script actively erased by invading forces, or did it simply fade as the Harappans assimilated into new cultures? The truth may be both. When the Aryans migrated into the region, they brought their own language, Sanskrit, and their own script, Brahmi. The Harappan writing system, already weakened by the civilization's decline, faced a double threat: cultural absorption and deliberate neglect. Unlike the Assyrians, who actively banned Aramaic, the Aryans may not have needed to suppress Harappan script outright. Without scribes to preserve it, without a power structure to enforce its use, the symbols simply slipped into obscurity. But here's what's fascinating. Recent studies suggest this wasn't just a primitive notation system. Computer analysis reveals patterns hinting at a hybrid script, part logographic, like Chinese characters, and part syllabic, like modern Hindi. That level of sophistication doesn't vanish by accident. So why does this matter? Because every undeciphered symbol is a locked door to an entire worldview. We know the Harappans traded with Sumer, but what stories did they tell? What laws did they write? Their script's disappearance isn't just a linguistic loss, it's a severed thread in the fabric of human history. And yet, there's hope. In 2008, archaeologists uncovered a potsherd in Tamil Nadu bearing markings strikingly similar to Harappan symbols, hinting that the script may have survived far longer than we thought. If deciphered, it could rewrite our understanding of ancient South Asia, proving once again that no empire, no invasion can fully silence the past. Aramaic wasn't just a language, it was the lifeblood of empires. For centuries, it served as the administrative glue of the Persian Empire, stretching from Egypt to India. Official decrees, tax records, even royal correspondence flowed through its elegant script, a bridge between cultures. But when Alexander the Great stormed across Asia, he brought more than armies. He brought a linguistic revolution. Greek became the new language of power, the mark of sophistication and control. Overnight, Aramaic was demoted, dismissed as the relic of a conquered people. Yet, this wasn't just about efficiency, it was about erasure. Alexander understood that to dominate a culture, you must first dominate its words. But languages have a way of outliving their oppressors. While Greek dominated courts and academies, Aramaic clung to life in the streets, the temples, the homes of those who refused to let their identity be rewritten. It evolved, splitting into dialects like Syriac, which became the language of early Christianity. Here's the irony: Jesus himself likely spoke Aramaic, not the Greek of the New Testament. The Lord's Prayer, the Sermon on the Mount, these foundational teachings were first uttered in a language empires had tried to bury. Imagine if those original words had survived untranslated, carrying the precise cadence and nuance of their speaker. Instead, they reached us filtered through the very language that sought to replace Aramaic, a reminder of how history is often written by the victors. The suppression of Aramaic reveals a pattern that repeats across millennia. When the Seleucids, Alexander's successors, outlawed Jewish traditions, they specifically targeted Hebrew scriptures, burning copies and punishing those who taught them. But in the shadows, scribes preserved the texts, and rebels like the Maccabees fought not just for land, but for the right to speak their own words. Centuries later, the Roman Empire would adopt a similar strategy, imposing Latin while marginalizing local languages. Yet Aramaic still persisted, a quiet act of defiance in a world intent on homogenizing thought. What makes Aramaic's survival so remarkable isn't just its resilience, it's its adaptability. While Greek faded as a spoken language, Aramaic found new life in liturgy, scholarship, and even modern communities. Today, small groups in Syria, Iraq, and the diaspora still speak Neo-Aramaic, a living thread connecting them to an unbroken lineage that empires failed to sever. The story of Aramaic isn't just about loss, it's about transformation. It reminds us that language isn't a static artifact but a living thing, capable of slipping through the fingers of those who try to grasp it too tightly. And sometimes the very act of suppression plants the seeds for a language's rebirth. The Vikings didn't just write with runes, they believed these symbols could summon storms, bless crops, or curse enemies. Each stroke of the chisel wasn't just a letter, it was an invocation. But when Christian missionaries swept through Scandinavia, they saw something dangerous in these carvings, not just paganism but power. Runes weren't merely banned, they were demonized, their very shapes twisted into signs of witchcraft. Churches were built atop raised rune stones, their inscriptions smashed or buried. The Latin alphabet, with its clean, controlled lines, became the only acceptable script, a tool to rewrite an entire culture's relationship with language. Yet the runes refused to vanish. Farmers kept amulets hidden in their homes, their surfaces worn smooth from secret touches. Warriors etched them into sword hilts, believing the old magic could still turn the tide of battle. Even as the church preached against them, runes lingered in folk charms, in boundary markers, in the margins of illuminated manuscripts where scribes quietly preserved what they couldn't openly practice. The irony, some of the most detailed records of runic magic come from Christian scholars who documented the very traditions they sought to erase, their writings becoming accidental archives of a forbidden knowledge. What was lost when runes were driven underground? Imagine the epic poems never carved into wood, the healing spells whispered but never written. The poetic Edda, our primary source of Norse mythology, survived only because Icelandic monks copied it in Latin letters centuries after the Viking Age. How much richer might it be if we had the original runic verses, with their rhythmic cadences and hidden layers of meaning? Today, scholars painstakingly reconstruct runic inscriptions from fragments, like detectives piecing together a burned manuscript. Each rediscovered runestone is a crack in the wall of silence, revealing names, laws, even jokes, proof that no suppression is ever total. This pattern of erasure echoes far beyond Scandinavia. Just as runes were buried, so too were the codices of the Maya, reduced to ashes by Spanish priests in the name of salvation. The difference, while runes faded slowly under cultural pressure, the destruction of Mesoamerican texts was swift and systematic, a single act of violence that erased centuries of astronomy, medicine, and history. Yet even there, fragments survived, hidden in caves or copied secretly by indigenous scribes. The story of runes and Maya glyphs alike reminds us, empires may ban a script, but they can never fully extinguish the voices that cling to it. There's a particular cruelty in burning books, not just because it destroys knowledge, but because it severs a people from their own history. In 1562, on the steps of a church in Mani, Mexico, Bishop Diego de Landa built a pyre that would haunt scholars for centuries. One by one, thousands of Mayan codices, folded bark paper books filled with intricate glyphs, were tossed into the flames. Landa called them works of the devil, but what they truly contained was the collective memory of a civilization. precise astronomical calculations that tracked Venus across millennia, medical treatises on herbal remedies, even records of royal dynasties whose names we'll never know. Only 4 codices escaped the fires, hidden away or smuggled to safety by those who understood their worth. The tragedy isn't just in the scale of the loss, but in what we now know those glyphs could tell us. For centuries, Mayan script was dismissed as primitive symbols until linguists in the 20th century cracked its logic. They discovered a writing system as sophisticated as Egyptian hieroglyphs, blending phonetic sounds with vivid pictorial elements. A single glyph could represent a syllable, an entire word, or even a play on words like a visual pun. Take the glyph for jaguar, which might incorporate the big cat spots into the shape of the word itself. This wasn't mere record-keeping, it was art, philosophy, and science woven into ink. What's chilling is how calculated the destruction was. Spanish conquistadors didn't just burn random texts, they targeted the codices of royal libraries, the ones containing treaties, tax records, and celestial observations. Why? Because controlling a people starts with controlling their narrative. Without their written history, the Maya were forced to rely on Spanish accounts that painted them as savages in need of salvation. Even Landa, who presided over the burnings, later wrote a book documenting Mayan customs, a bittersweet irony since his own actions ensured much of that culture could never be fully recovered. Yet fragments persist in unexpected places. Modern archaeologists using infrared imaging have found traces of glyphs beneath layers of plaster in Mayan pyramids, hidden by scribes who hoped future generations might uncover them. Descendants in Guatemala and Mexico still recite oral histories that echo the lost texts, preserving slivers of the wisdom Landa tried to erase. And in 2015, a previously unknown codex fragment surfaced in a private collection, proof that not all the voices from that pyre were silenced. The story of Mayan glyphs isn't just about what was lost, it's about what refuses to stay buried. Stalin took a different approach to linguistic erasure, one wrapped in bureaucracy rather than bonfires. In the 1930s, as part of his brutal campaign to consolidate power, he declared minority languages a threat to Soviet unity. Overnight, alphabets like Crimean Tatar's Arabic script or the Latin-based letters of Kurdish were deemed counter-revolutionary. Schools taught exclusively in Russian, and publishing in forbidden scripts became a crime punishable by exile. The message was clear: your mother tongue could be your death sentence. But as we'll see, even the iron grip of totalitarianism couldn't crush every whispered word. The Soviet Union under Stalin didn't just rewrite borders, it rewrote alphabets. In the 1930s, with the stroke of a pen, entire scripts vanished from official existence. The Latin-based alphabets painstakingly developed for languages like Azeri, Uzbek, and Chechen were declared obsolete, replaced overnight by Cyrillic. This wasn't about modernization, it was about control. A people who can't read their own history, their own poetry, their own laws, are a people easier to manipulate. But the real tragedy wasn't just the loss of letters, it was the loss of lives. Poets who wrote in the old scripts were branded nationalists, a death sentence during the Great Purge. Teachers caught using banned textbooks disappeared into the gulags. Even whispering a folk tale in your mother tongue could land you on a list. Take the case of the Abkhaz language spoken in the Caucasus. In 1938, its newly standardized Latin alphabet, a source of immense cultural pride, was abruptly scrapped. Overnight, Abkhaz schools switched to Cyrillic, severing children from literature their grandparents had written. The message was clear: your words belong to the state now, and it wasn't just languages with existing scripts that suffered. The Nivk people of Siberia, whose oral traditions had never been systematically written down, were denied the chance altogether. Soviet linguists insisted their stories be recorded only in Russian, as if their native tongue was unworthy of ink, yet resistance flickered in the shadows. In Kazakhstan, intellectuals secretly copied verses by Akhmet Beytasinuli, a poet whose Latin-based Kazakh alphabet had been outlawed, onto scraps of paper hidden inside Soviet-approved books. In Georgia, where Stalin himself was born, the ancient Nsibidi script survived only because its cultural roots ran too deep to uproot entirely. Even today, the scars of this linguistic violence linger. Walk through Baku or Tashkent, and you'll see Soviet-era signs in Cyrillic beside modern ones in resurrected Latin or Arabic scripts, a visual battleground of identity. The cruelty of Stalin's policy lay in its precision. Unlike the Spanish burning Mayan codices or missionaries demonizing runes, this was a clinical erasure, bureaucratically enforced. Census records were falsified to underreport minority language speakers. Publishing houses were shuttered for printing nationalist material. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, generations had grown up estranged from their own literary heritage. But just as Aramaic outlived Alexander, these scripts are stirring back to life. In Dagestan, activists teach children the Arabic-based Ajam script their great-grandparents used. In Kyrgyzstan, poets compose anew in a Latin alphabet that once sent their predecessors to Siberia. This story doesn't end with Stalin, it echoes in the colonial archives of Africa, where European powers waged their own war on local scripts. From the Bamum script of Cameroon, banned by French authorities for its subversive potential, to the Jez script of Ethiopia, dismissed as primitive by Italian occupiers, the pattern repeats. But here's what every empire fails to grasp. Letters carved into clay or etched onto bark carry something unbreakable, the stubborn will to remember. Nsibidi wasn't just a writing system, it was a living, breathing language of power. Used by the Ekp secret society across what's now southern Nigeria and Cameroon, these intricate symbols danced on skin, carved into ivory, and whispered across generations. A single swirl could dictate law. Crossed lines might declare war or weave a love story. But when British colonizers arrived in the 19th century, they didn't see sophistication in these strokes, they saw a threat. Missionaries branded Nsibidi as primitive scribbles, dismissing a system that had governed societies long before English letters touched African soil. The irony: Nsibidi's complexity rivaled the hieroglyphs Europeans revered, yet one was celebrated, the other condemned. The suppression of Nsibidi followed a familiar colonial playbook. British administrators banned its public use, fearing its ability to transmit messages they couldn't decipher. Ekp members, once the judges and historians of their communities, were forced into secrecy, preserving the symbols in rituals performed behind closed doors. But here's what the colonizers missed. Nsibidi wasn't just a script, it was an archive of philosophy. A symbol resembling interlocking rings didn't just mean marriage, it encoded ideals of reciprocity and balance. A zigzag line wasn't merely war, but a meditation on conflict's cyclical nature. By erasing these symbols, the British weren't just destroying art, they were dismantling an entire framework of thought. Yet Nsibidi refused to die. Fragments survived in the most unexpected places, tattooed on the wrists of elders, etched into the walls of sacred groves, even woven into the patterns of ceremonial cloth. Today, artists like Victor Ekpak revive these symbols in bold canvases, transforming ancient ideograms into contemporary protests. Scholars painstakingly reconstruct meanings from the few surviving ivory tusks and leather scrolls, each discovery a crack in colonialism's wall of silence. But the losses are staggering. Imagine the legal precedents, the epic poems, the scientific observations that vanished when Nsibidi was driven underground. What might we know about pre-colonial West African astronomy or medicine if those records had survived intact? The fight to reclaim Nsibidi is more than linguistic, it's a reckoning with power. In Calabar, educators now teach children the symbols their great-grandparents risked punishment to preserve. Museums once curated by colonial hands are returning artifacts adorned with Nsibidi to Nigerian ownership. Every restored symbol is a defiance of the myth that Africa had no written traditions before Europe arrived. The story of Nsibidi mirrors that of the Bamum script in Cameroon, nearly erased by French colonizers, or the Adinkra symbols of Ghana, reduced to crafts under British rule. These weren't just writing systems, they were the blueprints of civilizations. Now we turn to a script that vanished not through suppression, but catastrophe, the enigmatic glyphs of Rapa Nui, etched onto wooden tablets as Easter Island's ecosystem collapsed. What happens when a language's last speakers perish with the trees they wrote upon? The answer lies in a puzzle even more haunting than Nsibidi's fragments. The Etruscans didn't just precede Rome, they shaped it. Their elegant script, adapted from Greek letters around 700 BCE, once echoed through the hills of Tuscany, recording everything from trade deals to prophecies. But by the 1st century CE, their language had vanished so completely that even the Romans, who borrowed their gods, their engineering, and even the gladiatorial games from this sophisticated civilization, could no longer decipher it. Today, we can sound out Etruscan inscriptions perfectly. The letters are familiar, borrowed from the same Greek alphabet that gave rise to Latin, but the words themselves might as well be code. Out of 13,000 surviving fragments, most are tombstones or ritual objects, their meanings locked away like treasures in a vault no one can open. What makes Etruscans' disappearance so haunting is how deliberate it was. This wasn't a language fading naturally over time, it was systematically dismantled. As Rome expanded, speaking Etruscan became a mark of backwardness, a relic of a conquered people. The Romans didn't just impose their language, they rewrote history, casting the Etruscans as decadent and superstitious, their once revered scriptures dismissed as the ramblings of a dying culture. Yet traces linger in unexpected places. The Latin word for person, homo, likely comes from the Etruscan huma, the elaborate Roman toga, a direct descendant of Etruscan fashion. Even the famous Capitoline wolf, symbol of Rome's founding myth, was crafted by Etruscan hands. The very culture Rome sought to erase had already seeped into its bones. The greatest tragedy lies in what we've lost beyond vocabulary. Etruscan literature, praised by later Roman writers for its richness, survives only in fragments, one burned as kindling in the Middle Ages, another repurposed as a mummy wrapping in Egypt. Their religious texts, which supposedly contained detailed prophecies and rituals, were either destroyed or left to rot. Imagine the insights those scrolls might have held. First-hand accounts of a society where women dined alongside men, a rarity in the ancient world, or their advanced hydraulic engineering that drained marshes and built cities atop hills. Instead, we're left with broken phrases, my puya, I am pure, etched onto a vase, or zilath mechel rasnal, magistrate of the people, carved into a stone, glimpses of a world you will never fully reconstruct. But here's the twist, Etruscans' erasure wasn't inevitable. Unlike the Harappan script, which faded with its civilization, or Nsibidi, crushed under colonial boots, Etruscan was still vibrant when Rome chose to suppress it. The Romans didn't just conquer the Etruscans, they absorbed them, then erased the evidence. It's a pattern we've seen before, from Stalin's linguistic purges to the burning of Mayan codices, but with a peculiar Roman twist, the victors rewriting the past to make their dominance seem predestined. Yet even they couldn't erase everything. Etruscan loanwords pepper Italian today, and their art still fills museums, silent witnesses to a culture that refused to disappear completely. Now we turn to a script lost not to conquest but to faith. When the Cathars, a medieval Christian sect, were declared heretics, their books faced a fate worse than neglect. They were hunted down with the same fervor as their followers. The next chapter in this story of silenced voices begins with a bonfire in 13th century France, where the written word itself was declared the enemy. Coptic script is more than just the final chapter of ancient Egypt, it's a bridge across millennia. When the Arabs conquered Egypt in the 7th century, they didn't just bring a new religion or government, they brought a new language. Arabic became the tongue of power, of trade, of daily life, while Coptic, the direct descendant of the hieroglyphs carved into temple walls, was pushed to the margins. But here's what's extraordinary, it never fully vanished. Like a stubborn root beneath a paved road, Coptic survived in the one place empires often overlook, the whispered prayers of the faithful. For centuries, Egypt's Christians clung to it as their sacred language, even as the world around them forgot the words of the pharaohs. The suppression of Coptic wasn't just about replacing one language with another, it was about severing a people from their past. Arab rulers imposed Arabic not only for practicality but to redefine Egyptian identity. Coptic, with its ties to pre-Islamic Egypt, became a relic, dismissed as the language of a conquered people. Yet in the dim light of Coptic churches, priests continued to chant liturgy in the same syllables their ancestors had used to praise Isis and Osiris. The Lord's Prayer recited in Coptic today echoes with the cadence of a much older world, a linguistic thread stretching back to the builders of the pyramids. What's heartbreaking is how much we've lost. Imagine the libraries that might have existed, medical treatises from Alexandria, lost plays, or first-hand accounts of Cleopatra's reign, all written in Demotic or Coptic and lost to time. But here's the twist, some of those texts may still be out there. In remote monasteries like St. Anthony's in the eastern desert, manuscripts lie hidden in vaults or sealed within walls, their brittle pages preserving secrets we've yet to uncover. In 2019, researchers using multispectral imaging discovered faded Coptic inscriptions beneath layers of paint in a medieval church, proving that even fragments thought erased can resurface. Today, a quiet revolution is unfolding. Online platforms like Coptic Language TV teach the script to a new generation, not just as a liturgical curiosity, but as a living connection to Egypt's pre-Arab heritage. Young Egyptians, Muslims, and Christians alike are studying it with the fervor of detectives piecing together a family history ripped apart by time. The script's letters, adapted from Greek with a handful of demotic characters, are appearing on street art in Cairo and in viral social media posts reclaiming a narrative long controlled by conquerors. This isn't just about nostalgia. Coptic holds clues to pronouncing ancient Egyptian words correctly, a Rosetta Stone for the spoken language of the pharaohs. When linguists realized Coptic retained vowel sounds lost in hieroglyphic writing, it was like finding a key to a locked room. Suddenly, names like Tutankhamun could be voiced as they were 3,000 years ago, not as Victorian scholars guessed. The language banned as obsolete turned out to be the missing link to understanding an entire civilization. Now we turn to a script that faced erasure not once, but twice, first by empire, then by time. The story of Glagolitic, the oldest Slavic alphabet, begins with a saint's defiance and ends with a betrayal that nearly wiped it from history. Glagolitic script wasn't just letters on a page, it was an act of rebellion carved into parchment. In the 9th century, two Byzantine brothers, Cyril and Methodius, faced an impossible task: bring Christianity to the Slavs without a written language to convey scripture. Their solution, invent one, Glagolitic's twisting, intricate symbols, unlike any alphabet Europe had seen, weren't just tools for translation. They were a direct challenge to Rome's monopoly on sacred text. The Pope himself banned it, declaring Latin the only language fit for worship. But here's where the story twists. Glagolitic didn't just survive persecution. It thrived in the shadows, becoming a secret handshake among Slavic clergy who refused to let their faith be dictated by a distant empire. The Habsburgs, centuries later, made the same mistake as the Vatican. When they conquered Croatia, they found priests still using Glagolitic missals, their pages worn smooth by generations of hands. To the Habsburgs, this was more than outdated tradition. It was defiance. They burned books, shuttered churches, and imposed Latin with the same fervor as their predecessors. But Croatia's coastline became the script's unlikely stronghold. Isolated monasteries on rocky islands like Cherokee and Kres became time capsules, safeguarding Glagolitic even as the mainland succumbed to Habsburg decrees. The very geography that made these villages vulnerable, their remoteness became their armor. What's astonishing isn't just Glagolitic's endurance, but its adaptability. While most banned scripts cling to life as fragments or artifacts, this alphabet evolved. Scribes streamlined its ornate curves into a more practical cursive, the Bashkar tablet from 1100 showing both styles side by side, proof that a living script breathes and changes. Even under duress, Glagolitic birthed literature. The Vinodol Codex of 1288, Europe's oldest Slavic legal text, laid down laws in defiantly local letters. Today, walking through the stone villages of Istria, you'll find Glagolitic carved into door frames and church walls, a quiet middle finger to empires long gone. The script's survival hinged on something deeper than stubbornness. It became inseparable from identity. When Napoleon briefly controlled Dalmatia, his officials were baffled to find peasants using Glagolitic for land deeds and love letters, not just liturgy. To Croatians, these weren't mere symbols, they were heirlooms passed down like recipes or folk tunes. That emotional tether outlasted political storms. Even Stalin's playbook couldn't erase a script woven so tightly into daily life. Now we turn to a language that faced erasure not by sword or decree, but by sheer neglect. The whistled syllables of La Gomera, a script without ink that nearly vanished when the world stopped listening. Linear isn't just an undeciphered script, it's a ghost whispering from the ruins of a lost civilization. Scrawled onto clay tablets in the palaces of Knossos and Phaistos, these cryptic symbols have baffled scholars for over a century. We know their cousin, Linear B, was cracked in the 1950s, revealing an early form of Greek. But Linear A, it clings to its secrets like the frescoes of bull leapers clinging to Minoan walls. The mystery cuts deeper than mere translation, it's a cultural black hole. What songs echoed in those labyrinthine halls? What laws governed a society where women stood equal to men, and art flourished without the shadow of war? Theories swirl like the spirals on a Minoan vase. Some linguists believe linear records a language isolate, a tongue with no known relatives, making it exponentially harder to decode without a Rosetta Stone. Others argue it's an ancestor of Etruscan or even Luwian, languages spoken across the Bronze Age Mediterranean. But the most haunting possibility, that Mycenaean invaders didn't just conquer Crete around 1450 BC, they actively suppressed the script. When Linear B appeared, it wasn't an evolution, it was an imposition, a bureaucratic tool for new rulers to tally their plunder. The Minoans' flowing, organic symbols were replaced by the Mycenaeans' rigid accounting marks, as if poetry had been traded for spreadsheets. What's lost in those silent tablets isn't just words, it's worldview. Linear B tablets from later periods obsess over inventories, so many jars of oil, so many chariot wheels. But the few hundred surviving lineae of fragments hint at something different. Symbols for grain and honey appear alongside intricate glyphs resembling waves, trees, and goddesses. Were these ritual texts trade agreements with Egypt? A single tablet from Adja Triada shows a column of numbers beside a boat, a shipping manifest, or a prayer for safe passage. The Minoans dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries, yet we're left guessing at the treaties or maps that might have once existed. The cruelest twist. We may never know. Unlike Mayan glyphs or cuneiform, lineae lacks bilingual inscriptions. The Phaistos disc, that infamous clay circle stamped with mysterious symbols, might not even be linear, just another dead end. Yet hope flickers in unexpected places. In 2020, researchers using AI pattern recognition identified potential grammatical structures, suggesting the script isn't just logographic but syllabic. And in the caves of Crete, shepherds still stumble upon tablets buried in goat dung, their symbols waiting for the day someone cracks their code. Now we cross oceans to a script erased not by time but by colonial greed. When the Spanish landed in the Philippines, they encountered Baybayin, a flowing script etched onto bamboo and leaves. Within generations, it would be banned as the devil's letters, its graceful curves sacrificed to the cross and the crown. Sequoia's syllabary wasn't just an alphabet, it was a revolution carved into tree bark. In the early 1800s, this Cherokee silversmith, with no formal education, single-handedly invented a writing system so intuitive that within months, thousands of Cherokee people could read and write their own language for the first time. By 1828, the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper, was rolling off the presses in New Echota, Georgia, its columns filled with tribal laws, international news, and even ads, all in the flowing characters Sequoia had dreamed into existence. But this flowering of literacy struck fear into the U.S. government, a people who could document their own history, print their own laws, and communicate across distances without white interpreters. That was a threat. The crackdown came with brutal efficiency. After gold was discovered on Cherokee land, the government saw an opportunity. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced the Cherokee and other tribes westward on the Trail of Tears, where thousands perished in the cold. But the violence wasn't just physical, it was linguistic. Missionary schools, backed by federal policies, punished children for speaking or writing Cherokee, sometimes washing their mouths out with soap or tying them to chairs for hours. The message was clear: to be civilized meant to erase yourself. Newspapers were burned, printing presses smashed, and by the 20th century, fluent Cherokee speakers had dwindled to a handful of elders. What makes this erasure particularly cruel is how deliberate it was. Unlike scripts like lineae or Harappan, which faded with their civilizations, Cherokee syllabary was actively suppressed at the height of its usefulness. Imagine the literature that might have existed: novels, scientific treatises, or political manifestos written in a script designed by and for indigenous people. Instead, we're left with fragments, a surviving copy of the Cherokee Phoenix, hidden in an attic, diary entries scrawled secretly in syllabary by students at boarding schools. Yet, like the stubborn roots of the Cherokee's sacred white oak, the script refused to die. Today, language immersion schools in Oklahoma and North Carolina teach children to write in Sequoia's characters, stitching together fragments of oral tradition with recovered texts. Tech plays a role too. Unicode now includes Cherokee syllabary, enabling texts and social media posts that would have been unthinkable a century ago. But the losses are incalculable. How many medicinal recipes, how many ancestral stories, how many court rulings from the Cherokee Nation's independent government vanished because paper burns faster than memory? The story of Cherokee syllabary echoes beyond North America. Half a world away, another script faced annihilation not by policy, but by war. In Bosnia, the delicate strokes of Arabica, a modified Arabic script used by Bosniaks for centuries, were nearly erased during the ethnic cleansing of the 1990s. Libraries burned, centuries of literature turned to ash, all because symbols on a page were seen as markers of identity too dangerous to tolerate. Ugaritic cuneiform wasn't just another ancient script, it was a Bronze Age marvel, a 30-letter alphabet pressed into clay tablets with astonishing precision. Developed around 1400 BC in the bustling port city of Ugarit, this writing system combined the efficiency of an alphabet with the durability of cuneiform, recording everything from epic poetry to diplomatic treaties. But in 1200 BC, the Sea Peoples swept through the Mediterranean like a storm, leaving Ugarit in smoldering ruins. The invaders didn't just topple buildings, they shattered a linguistic revolution. What's chilling is how much more than words was lost when those tablets were buried under ash. Ugarit wasn't just a city, it was a hub of innovation, a place where scribes experimented with shorthand, symbols for faster record-keeping, where merchants tracked shipments using early accounting methods, where myths like the legend of Keret were written down for the first time. The survival of Ugaritic tablets is a bittersweet accident of history. Fired by the very flames that destroyed the city, these clay documents hardened into permanence, waiting 3,000 years to be unearthed. Among them, archaeologists found something extraordinary: multilingual dictionaries, painstakingly compiled to translate between Ugaritic, Akkadian, Hurrian, and even Cypro-Minoan. These weren't just word lists, they were bridges between cultures, evidence of a cosmopolitan society where language was a tool of connection, not conquest. One tablet preserves a desperate plea for help, sent to Ugarit's allies as the Sea Peoples advanced. The reply never came, and the words remain frozen in time, a last gasp before silence. What haunts scholars isn't just the violence of Ugarit's fall, but the innovations that vanished with it. The city's scribes had developed a system for abbreviating common words, an early form of shorthand that could have revolutionized writing centuries before the Greeks adopted the alphabet. Their diplomatic archives reveal a sophisticated understanding of international law, with treaties that included clauses for asylum and trade disputes. Even their myths, like the Baal cycle, show literary techniques once thought to be much later inventions: parallel stanzas, dramatic monologues, even something akin to stage directions. Had Ugarit survived, might we have had epic poetry as complex as Homer's 500 years earlier? The tragedy of Ugaritic cuneiform mirrors a pattern we've seen again and again, from the Mayan codices to Cherokee syllabary. Conquest doesn't just erase lives, it erases possibilities. When the Sea Peoples burned Ugarit, they didn't just destroy a library, they snuffed out a trajectory of human thought. Yet even in annihilation, there's resilience. Modern linguists use Ugaritic to untangle the roots of the alphabet, proving that no script ever truly disappears. Its letters live on in the Phoenician alphabet, which gave rise to Greek, Latin, and ultimately the words you're hearing right now. The invaders failed to grasp a truth we now understand: language is wildfire. Stamp it out in one place and it springs up in another, carrying embers of the past into the future. Now we turn to a script deemed so dangerous, possessing it could cost you your life. In the shadow of the Andes, the Spanish labeled Quipus knotted strings that recorded everything from taxes to history as tools of the devil. But what secrets did these vibrant chords truly hold? King Enjoya didn't just rule the Bamum people, he gave them a gift no empire could tolerate: the power to write their own history. In 1896, this visionary monarch of Cameroon's grasslands sat down with his scribes and did something extraordinary. Over years of meticulous work, they invented an entirely new script, one that captured the richness of their language and culture in elegant, geometric symbols. By 1914, Bamum script had evolved through multiple versions, growing more sophisticated with each iteration. Schools taught it, courts used it to record laws, and poets penned verses that would have been lost to oral tradition. But this flowering of literacy struck terror into the hearts of German colonizers. They didn't just ban the script, they hunted it down like contraband, seizing manuscripts and tossing them into bonfires. Why? Because a people who can document their own past are a people who can imagine a future beyond colonial rule. The destruction of Bamum script wasn't just about suppressing rebellion, it was about erasing an entire intellectual tradition. Among the burned texts were treatises on medicine, astronomy, and ethics, all composed in a writing system that reflected Bamum cosmology. The symbol for truth, resembling interlocking circles, encoded their philosophy of communal harmony. The glyph for justice incorporated the scales of a proverb about balanced leadership. These weren't mere letters, they were vessels of thought designed by a king who understood that language shapes reality. When German soldiers ransacked the royal library in Foumban, they weren't just burning paper, they were trying to incinerate a worldview. Yet fragments survived, hidden in the most unexpected places. Elderly retainers smuggled manuscripts out in grain sacks, burying them in clay pots beneath their homes. Women wove symbols into textile patterns, disguising writing as decoration. Today, scholars race against time to reconstruct the script from these scattered clues, like detectives piecing together a shredded manifesto. In 2007, a cache of royal diaries surfaced in a Paris antique shop, their Bamum glyphs detailing trade routes and diplomatic strategies. Each recovered page chips away at the colonial myth that Africa had no written traditions before Europe arrived. What makes Bamum's story especially poignant is its modernity. Unlike ancient scripts like Ugaritic or Linear A, this was a writing system born on the cusp of the 20th century, proof that innovation wasn't confined to the global north. King Enjoyer didn't just copy Arabic or Latin letters. He created something wholly original, adapting indigenous symbols into a flexible syllabary. Had it survived, Bamum script might have become a model for other African languages, a tool for decolonizing education long before the term existed. Instead, its suppression became a blueprint for how empires maintain control, not just through armies, but through the systematic destruction of memory. Now we turn to a script erased not by foreign invaders, but by holy wars. When Catholic and Protestant factions battled for supremacy in 16th century Europe, their most devastating weapon wasn't the sword, it was the censorship of competing Bibles. The story of the Waldensians' lost translations reveals how faith itself became a battleground for linguistic control. Manichaean script wasn't just a way to write, it was a declaration of cosmic war. Flowing across parchment from North Africa to China, these elegant letters carried the teachings of Mani, the 3rd century prophet who saw the universe as a battleground between light and darkness. His followers, weaving threads of Christianity, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism into a radical new tapestry, needed a script as versatile as their vision. So they crafted one, its curves mirroring the harmony they sought between body and spirit. But empires saw heresy in every stroke. Zoroastrian priests in Persia burned Manichaean libraries as lies woven by Ahriman. Christian emperors in Rome ordered scribes' hands severed for copying its texts. Even in faraway Turpan, where scrolls survived for centuries in desert caves, Buddhist monks eventually whitewashed over Manichaean frescoes, burying the words beneath layers of paint. The fragments that survived tell a haunting story. In the ruins of Gayachang, archaeologists found prayer books where luminous hymns to wisdom sit beside meticulous astronomical charts. proof that Manichaeans saw no divide between science and spirituality. One parchment shred from Egypt preserves a debate between a Manichaean scholar and a Christian bishop, its margins crammed with notes like a medieval Twitter thread. But these are mere crumbs from a feast of lost knowledge. Imagine the illuminated manuscripts that might have existed, cosmological maps tracing the soul's journey through celestial spheres, or plays dramatizing the struggle between divine light and material darkness. The very act of writing in Manichaean script was considered sacred, each letter a spark against the void. What truly unsettled rulers wasn't the doctrine itself, but its universality. Manichaeism adapted effortlessly across cultures. In Rome, it wore Christian garb. Along the Silk Road, it borrowed Buddhist imagery. This chameleon quality made it unstoppable and terrifying to authorities who demanded doctrinal purity. When the Igha Cogonate adopted Manichaeism as its state religion in the 8th century, they minted coins bearing both the cross and the crescent, a heresy to neighboring empires. The crackdown was inevitable. By the time Genghis Khan's horsemen stormed through Central Asia, most Manichaean texts had already been reduced to ash, their ashes scattered like the prophet Mani himself, whose flayed skin was allegedly stuffed and displayed as a warning. Yet whispers remain. In the caves of Dunhuang, a single intact Manichaean codex survived the compendium of the teachings of Mani, its vibrant miniatures showing palm trees and pearly gates glowing against lapis lazuli. Turn the page and you'll find something extraordinary. Hymns not just in Middle Persian, but in Old Igha and Sogdian, proof of a faith that refused linguistic borders. Today, scholars painstakingly reassemble torn folios like a jigsaw puzzle of the divine, each scrap revealing how much was lost when empires decided which truths were allowed to survive. Now we turn to a different kind of disappearance, not destruction, but gradual fading. The story of Ogham script begins with notches carved into standing stones and ends with a language so thoroughly assimilated that even its alphabet became a relic. Tangut script wasn't just writing, it was a crossroads carved in stone. High in the western Xia kingdom's mountain fortresses, scribes blended Chinese brushstrokes with Tibetan curves and Turkic rhythms, creating a script as cosmopolitan as the Silk Road itself. When Genghis Khan's cavalry stormed through in 1227, they didn't just topple a dynasty, they buried a linguistic experiment that had thrived for 2 centuries. The Mongols outlawed Tangut, executing scholars and burning official documents with the same efficiency they'd shown when erasing entire cities. But here's what they missed. Deep in the caves of Haishuacheng, monks had already hidden tens of thousands of manuscripts, wrapped in silk and sealed against time. These forgotten texts tell a story the conquerors couldn't imagine. Among the Buddhist sutras and administrative records are marriage contracts between Tangut nobles and Igha merchants, medical treatises combining Chinese acupuncture with Persian herbalism, even star charts noting supernovas observed simultaneously in Samarkand and Kaifeng. One particularly poignant discovery, a phrasebook for Silk Road travelers, its pages worn thin from use, offering translations between Tangut, Chinese, Igha, and even Arabic, proof that this wasn't just a kingdom of warriors but of polyglots. The script itself mirrored this fusion, with characters adapting Chinese radicals to represent Tangut phonetics, while vertical writing paid homage to Tibetan traditions. Deciphering these texts today feels like unlocking a time capsule of cultural exchange. Take the Tangut translation of Confucius Analects, annotated with commentary by Nestorian Christian scholars, a dialogue of philosophies that would have been unthinkable elsewhere in the medieval world. Or the military manual blending Mongol horseback tactics with Chinese siege engineering, its diagrams annotated in 3 languages. What unsettled Genghis wasn't just Western Zia's wealth, but its intellectual independence, a kingdom that had created its own writing system rather than borrowing China's, that minted coins inscribed in both Tangut and Sanskrit, that served as the Rosetta Stone of Eurasian thought. The script's complexity became its downfall, with over 6,000 unique characters, some pictographic, others phonetic. Tangut demanded years of study, making its surviving speakers easy targets for Mongol purges. Yet the very features that doomed it fascinate linguists today. Some characters change meaning based on neighboring symbols, like linguistic chameleons. Others incorporate tiny diacritics indicating vowel harmony, a feature borrowed from Turkic tongues. This wasn't just writing, it was a masterclass in cultural synthesis. Now the story takes a darker turn. As archaeologists brush dust from Tangut manuscripts in St. Petersburg and Beijing collections, they're piecing together a final, chilling chapter. The last dated Tangut text isn't a royal decree or religious scroll, it's a prisoner's confession, scratched onto birch bark in 1352, over a century after the kingdom's fall. The writer, a scribe captured by Yuan dynasty officials, uses hybrid characters mixing Tangut with Fag's postscript, a desperate attempt to communicate with his captors. His crime, teaching the forbidden script to children in secret, his final plea, etched in shaky strokes, the words live when the people remember. From the ashes of the Silk Road, we journey to 20th century oppression, where another script faced annihilation, not by nomadic horsemen, but by modern dictatorship. The story of Tifinog, the ancient Berber alphabet, reveals how linguistic repression wears new masks in the age of nationalism. Tifinog's script isn't just an alphabet, it's a rebellion carved into rock. Long before Arabic script crossed the Sahara, the Berber people of North Africa were etching these angular, geometric symbols onto cliffs and stelae, their lines as stark and enduring as the Atlas Mountains themselves. The Romans called it Libyan writing, dismissing it as the scratchings of nomadic tribes, while Arab conquerors later suppressed it as a relic of paganism. But what empires failed to grasp was this: Tifinog wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a cultural fingerprint preserving myths, land rights, and even the star lore of the Tuareg caravanners who navigated by its celestial maps. The script's survival is a testament to sheer stubbornness. When colonial France banned Tifinog in schools, declaring Arabic and French the only civilized languages, Berber mothers taught it to their children as embroidery patterns, stitching symbols onto fabrics worn daily under the occupiers' noses. In remote desert caves, Tuareg elders kept the script alive by inscribing it onto leather pouches holding sacred amulets, ensuring each generation could read the old warnings against drought or raiders. Even the shapes of the letters defied erasure, some resembling human figures mid-dance, others mimicking the tools of pastoral life, a plow, a tent peg, a crescent moon. This wasn't just writing, it was a visual archive of a people's relationship with the land. What stories does Tifinog guard? Fragments hint at a lost pre-Islamic epic, the Tale of Ansar, where a water deity punishes hybristic kings with floods, a narrative echoing far older Mediterranean myths. Inscriptions on funerary stones whisper of matriarchal clans who traced lineage through mothers, not fathers, their legal codes etched in stone to avoid the distortions of oral retelling. Most tantalizing are the astronomical records. Tuareg observers tracked the dog star's movements with Tifinog notations, predicting rains centuries before modern meteorology. Each recovered glyph chips away at the colonial myth that Berber culture was illiterate before Arab contact. The script's modern revival reads like a thriller. In 1968, a Kabyle linguist named Moulaud Mamri defied Algeria's ban on Berber languages, secretly publishing a Tifinog primer disguised as a folk art book. By the 1990s, activists in Morocco were spray painting the symbols on walls during protests, their stark lines becoming a rallying cry for Amazigh identity. Today, Tifinog keyboards exist on smartphones, and children in the Rif Mountains learn it alongside Arabic and French, a quiet victory for a script that outlasted empires. Now we turn to a language that wasn't just suppressed but methodically dismantled. In the misty highlands of Scotland, Gaelic faced an erasure so total, it wasn't just banned, it was shamed out of existence. Delcarlian runes weren't just letters, they were spells carved into the very bones of the land. Hidden in the forests of central Sweden, farmers etched these angular symbols onto wooden calendars, door frames, and even cow horns long after the Viking age had faded into legend. The Swedish church called them devil's marks, and officials dismissed them as superstition unfit for a modernizing nation. But in remote villages like Älvdalen, where winters were harsh and the soil unforgiving, the runes held something precious, the accumulated wisdom of generations. A single stroke could mark the best day to plant barley. A cluster of lines might warn of an approaching storm. This wasn't just writing, it was survival encoded in wood. The persecution of Delcarlian runes reveals a truth about power. It's not enough to control laws or land, you must control how people record their lives. When Sweden's central government banned the script in the 17th century, they weren't just outlawing symbols, they were severing a direct line to pre-Christian knowledge. Farmers responded with quiet defiance. They carved runes on the undersides of tables where only family would see them. They wove them into tapestry patterns, hiding incantations for healthy livestock in plain sight. One recently discovered staff from 1822 bears a chilling inscription. The frost comes early this year, like when grandmother died. These weren't idle scratches, they were a rebellion against enforced silence. What secrets did these runes hold? Fragments suggest a blend of practical science and sacred trust. A calendar stick from Orsa tracks not just lunar phases but rare celestial events. A comet's appearance in 1809, an aurora so bright it lit up snowfields like daylight. Other inscriptions mix Norse mythology with Catholic saints, proof that folk traditions adapted rather than vanished. The most haunting finds are the warding sticks, lengths of wood carved with runes and placed at property boundaries. Modern linguists realized these weren't mere no trespassing signs, they were legal documents, listing grazing rights and water access in a script the crown couldn't read. The runes' resilience lies in their adaptability. By the 19th century, when Älvdalen's last native rune carver passed away, the symbols had already jumped mediums. Women embroidered them onto bridal gowns as fertility charms. Blacksmiths stamped them onto tools to prevent rust. Even the shapes evolved, some taking on floral curls to mimic fashionable Latin script, others simplifying into shorthand for quick notes between neighbors. This fluidity made them impossible to fully eradicate. Today, linguists pore over farmhouse attics and museum basements, piecing together a fragmented encyclopedia of peasant life. One ledger from 1897 records a recipe for starving out wolves using rune-marked bait, its method later proven effective by wildlife biologists. Now we turn to a script that faced a different kind of vanishing, not by force but by sheer neglect. In the jungles of Borneo, the Rencong alphabet of the Dayak people slipped into silence when colonial schools replaced it with Roman letters. But deep in the rainforest, the trees still remember. Rongorongo glyphs aren't just carvings, they're a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, etched onto weathered wooden tablets by hands long turned to dust. On remote Easter Island, these intricate symbols spiral across ancient boards in alternating directions. a writing system so unique that not a single comparable script exists anywhere on Earth. But here's what chills linguists to the core. By the time Europeans took interest in these tablets in the 1860s, the last people who could read them had already vanished. Whalers and slave raiders had kidnapped nearly the entire Rapa Nui population, forcing them into brutal labor in Peruvian mines. When a handful of survivors returned, they carried smallpox instead of stories. The keys to Rongorongo didn't just slip away, they were ripped from history's grasp. What makes these glyphs so tantalizing is their eerie sophistication. Some symbols resemble plants and animals extinct for centuries, like the island's iconic palm trees or massive seabirds. Others show bizarre hybrid creatures, half human, half fish figures that might represent deities or ancestral spirits. The most haunting possibility, that Rongorongo wasn't just a writing system but a sacred calendar, tracking the celestial cycles that guided Polynesian voyagers across thousands of miles of open ocean. One tablet, known as the Mammary, contains a sequence of glyphs that some researchers believe corresponds to lunar phases, a survival tool for an island where misreading the skies could mean starvation. The tragedy of Rongorongo isn't just the loss of knowledge, it's the violence behind that loss. Missionaries who arrived in 1864 found dozens of tablets repurposed as fishing reels or firewood, their meanings already forgotten. A few were sent to European collectors as curiosities, where they gathered dust in museums while linguists squabbled over theories. Was this a true writing system, or elaborate mnemonic devices for oral traditions? The truth may lie somewhere in between. Recent studies suggest Rongorongo uses a form of proto-writing called semasiography, where symbols convey meaning without fixed phonetic values. Think emoji before smartphones. Deciphering even fragments could rewrite Pacific history. Imagine learning how the Rapa Nui viewed their famous Moai statues, or what prayers were offered as their forests dwindled. A single translated line might reveal whether these glyphs hold warnings about ecological collapse, a message carved in wood that echoes across centuries. Today, computer algorithms scan the tablets for patterns, while indigenous activists push for their repatriation from foreign museums. But the deeper question remains, can a script be revived when its cultural context has been so thoroughly erased? The answer may lie in the unlikeliest of places, a handful of folk songs still sung on the island, their lyrics possibly preserving shards of Rongorongo's rhythm and cadence. Now we turn to a script whose erasure was no accident of history, but a deliberate act of political vengeance. When Korea's Hangul script was invented in the 15th century, it was hailed as a democratic revolution until the Japanese occupation tried to strangle it in its cradle. The story of how Hangul survived reveals why some scripts are too dangerous to kill. Vai syllabary didn't just appear overnight, it was born from a moment of quiet defiance. In 1833, a Liberian man named Momolu Duwalu Bukil dreamed of a writing system that didn't rely on European letters. What emerged was a series of elegant symbols, each representing a syllable of the Vai language, carved into wood and pressed onto paper with homemade ink. This wasn't just an alphabet, it was a declaration of independence. Colonial officials recoiled at the idea of Africans writing without their oversight, dismissing Vai as primitive scratches. But Bukil and his community saw something revolutionary in these symbols: the power to record land deeds, family histories, and medicinal recipes without a foreign script mediating their truth. The Survival of Vai Script reads like a secret history. When missionaries demanded converts abandon it for Latin letters, Vai elders began teaching the syllabary in moonlit sessions, the pages of their notebooks hidden beneath floorboards. Merchants used it to keep ledgers safe from prying colonial eyes, their sales and debts encrypted in symbols outsiders couldn't decipher. Even the shapes of the letters carried meaning. Some mirrored everyday tools like weaving looms or palm nut crackers, grounding literacy in the rhythms of daily life. This wasn't just writing, it was cultural armor. What knowledge did these pages protect? Fragments reveal herbal remedies for malaria, recorded generations before quinine arrived on European ships. Land disputes were settled with contracts written in Vai, preserving ancestral claims against colonial seizure. Most remarkably, the script adapted organically. New symbols emerged for modern concepts like photograph or school, proving its resilience wasn't just about preservation, but evolution. Unlike scripts imposed from above, Vai grew from the ground up, its very flexibility making it impossible to eradicate. Today, the script's legacy is etched into UNESCO memory of the World Register, a rare triumph against cultural erasure. Liberian schools now teach Vai alongside English, and activists use it to digitize oral histories that colonialism tried to silence. But the real victory lies in the notebooks still passed down in Vai households, proof that autonomy isn't just won on battlefields, but in the quiet act of a grandmother teaching her granddaughter to shape the symbols of their ancestors. Now we turn to a script that faced annihilation not by colonial edict, but by holy war. When the Catholic Church declared the Cathar heresy a threat, they didn't just burn people, they burned the very words they spoke. The story of Occitan suppression reveals how faith can become a weapon against language itself. Old Hungarian runes weren't just letters, they were the heartbeat of the steppes, carved into wooden sticks and etched onto the blades of warriors who rode with our pod into the Carpathian Basin. These angular, dagger-like symbols, known as shakely script, told time through lunar calendars, recorded epic poetry about shamans who spoke with wolves, and even marked the boundaries of sacred groves where pagan rituals unfolded under the stars. But when King Stephen converted Hungary to Christianity in the year 1000, the church declared these runes devil's marks, ordering them scrubbed from stone and memory alike. What followed wasn't just a change of alphabet, it was a cultural amputation, severing an entire people from the oral traditions and celestial knowledge woven into those strokes. Yet in the misty valleys of Transylvania, the runes clung to life like lichen on ancient oaks. Shakely shepherds, isolated by mountainous terrain, kept using them to tally flocks and carve protective charms into doorframes well into the 1800s. One recently discovered staff from 1782 bears a chilling inscription. The frost comes when the Pleiades hide, a farmer's almanac and a pagan star hymn fused into one. Even more tantalizing are the toltos sticks, wooden rods inscribed with runes that village healers used to diagnose illness. Modern linguists realized these weren't mere doodles. The spacing and grouping of symbols matched known incantations from Siberian Turkic tribes, hinting at a spiritual network stretching back to the Magyars' nomadic origins. What was lost when the runes faded? Imagine the epic poems that might have rivaled the Norse Eddas, or the herbal remedies encoded in runic shorthand. A 16th-century Jesuit's diary complains of shakely women, muttering old signs over sick children, their remedies likely drawn from rune-inscribed healing scrolls now turned to dust. The greatest tragedy lies in the runes' musical legacy. Fragments suggest they were once sung as well as written, their angular forms mimicking the rising and falling tones of pagan hymns. When linguists reconstructed one such chant from a Transylvanian folk song in 2012, they found its rhythm perfectly matched the runic spacing on a 9th-century amulet, proof that these weren't just symbols, but musical notation for rituals erased by time. The church's victory over the runes was never total. Hidden in plain sight, their shapes survived as masons' marks on medieval cathedrals and as embroidery patterns on peasant blouses. Today, Hungarian nationalists reclaim them as symbols of identity, while scholars painstakingly piece together fragments from cattle brands and wedding chests. But the rune's true legacy might be more subtle. Modern Hungarian still carries traces of their worldview. The word for writing, likely derives from the runic term for to cut, a linguistic fossil preserving the memory of blades carving wisdom into wood. Now we turn to a script swallowed not by conquest but by the earth itself. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79, it didn't just bury Pompeii, it entombed entire libraries of Oscan, a language that once rivaled Latin. What secrets lie unread beneath the ash? Cretan hieroglyphs aren't just Europe's oldest writing, they're a riddle wrapped in volcanic ash. Etched onto delicate clay seals and stone tablets around 4,000 years ago, these swirling symbols predate even the famous linear script of the Minoans. Picture this, a bustling palace complex at Knossos where scribes press these glyphs into soft clay to mark jars of olive oil, bundles of textiles, and diplomatic correspondence. But unlike the orderly rows of cuneiform or hieroglyphs, Cretan symbols dance across surfaces with an almost playful energy, spirals that might represent waves or labyrinths, stylized flowers echoing the island's saffron harvests, even abstract human figures with arms raised in what could be prayer or celebration. Their very fluidity makes them maddeningly elusive. Are they pure pictographs, a fledgling syllabary, or something in between? Thera's catastrophic eruption around 1600 BC didn't just bury Akrotiri under pumice, it may have erased the cultural context needed to crack this code. Archaeologists have found fewer than 400 hieroglyphic inscriptions, most so brief they offer no linguistic foothold. A single seal from Malia bears what might be a royal name surrounded by symbols resembling bees and double axes, but without a bilingual equivalent like the Rosetta Stone. These glyphs guard their secrets fiercely. What's tantalizing is how they mirror and diverge from other early writing systems. Some symbols echo Egyptian hieroglyphs, suggesting cultural exchange across the Mediterranean, while others are wholly unique, like a looping sign dubbed the arbor glyph that might represent sacred trees or the famed Labrys axe. Nature wasn't the only force that silenced these symbols. As Mycenaean Greeks gained influence in Crete after Thera's eruption, they brought Linear B, a script tailored for their own language, pushing the older hieroglyphs into obsolescence. But traces linger in unexpected places. Recent infrared scans of pottery fragments from Phaistos reveal faint hieroglyphic markings beneath later linear inscriptions, like palimpsests whispering of a script in transition. Even more intriguing are the similarities between Cretan glyphs and symbols found on Neolithic artifacts from the Balkans, hinting at a writing tradition that may have spanned millennia before coalescing into formal script. What stories might these glyphs have told? A clay ball from Knossos studded with hieroglyphs could be a merchant's contract or a priest's oracle. A seal impression showing a ship beside a fish glyph might record a trading voyage or a mythic sea journey. The tragedy isn't just the loss of words, but the loss of world view, how the Minoans conceptualized time, divinity, or social hierarchy through these marks. Unlike the bureaucratically minded Linear B tablets, which obsess over inventory counts, Cretan hieroglyphs feel alive with artistic flourish. Were they used for sacred texts now crumbled to dust? Private letters between queens, we may never know. Now we turn to a script that faced erasure not by natural disaster, but by imperial decree. When the Spanish encountered the vibrant glyphs of the Mixtec people, they saw not a literary tradition, but a threat to their divine mission, one they sought to extinguish with fire and zeal. Loma script wasn't just letters on a page, it was a quiet revolution inked onto scraps of paper hidden from colonial eyes. In the dense forests of Liberia in the 1930s, a man named Wido Zobo took up a mission that would have terrified any colonizer. He invented an entirely new way to write his people's language. Using symbols inspired by everyday life, a palm nut, a farming hoe, the curve of a river, Zobo crafted an alphabet that didn't rely on European letters or Arabic script. But when French officials caught wind of it, they didn't see brilliance, they saw defiance. Overnight, Zobo's notebooks were confiscated, his students interrogated, and his script branded as subversive. Because in the colonial playbook, a people who could document their own history were a people who could imagine freedom. The persecution of Loma script reveals a truth empires have always feared: innovation doesn't require permission. Zobo's symbols weren't just tools for writing, they were vessels for grassroots history. Elders used them to record land disputes settled under the sacred kola tree, preserving ancestral claims against colonial seizure. Women etched herbal remedies onto bark paper, creating medical texts that European doctors dismissed as superstition. Even the shapes of the letters carried layers of meaning. One symbol, resembling a bird in flight, doubled as a metaphor for storytelling's power to carry memory across generations. This wasn't just an alphabet, it was an act of cultural sovereignty. What's miraculous is how Loma survived. When French officers raided villages, locals smuggled Zobo's charts inside hollowed-out walking sticks or stitched them into the linings of ceremonial robes. Children practiced the script by tracing symbols in the dirt, then smoothing them away before authorities could see. By the time Liberia gained independence in 1945, Loma had become a badge of resistance, its very existence proving that colonial violence couldn't stamp out ingenuity. Today, linguists pore over surviving scraps, a grocery list here, a love poem there, piecing together a mosaic of daily life that official records ignored. One faded ledger from 1938 lists the names of resistance fighters in neat Loma columns, their bravery encoded in a script the French never bothered to learn. Now we turn to a script swallowed not by oppression, but by the tides of war. When the Khmer Empire fell to Thai invaders in the 15th century, its elegant writing system didn't just fade, it was systematically dismantled. The story of how Khmer script nearly vanished reveals how conquest rewrites more than borders. It rewires memory itself. Jurchen script wasn't just writing, it was a bridge between worlds, carved into stone by a dynasty caught between two empires. When the Jin dynasty rose to power in 12th century Manchuria, they faced a dilemma: how to govern a vast territory that included both nomadic Jurchen tribes and the literate Chinese elite they'd conquered. Their solution, a bold fusion of cultures. Jurchen scribes adapted Chinese characters to fit their own language, creating a script that mirrored the strokes of their southern neighbors while preserving the sounds and idioms of the steppes. For a brief, shining moment, it worked. Official decrees were issued in both scripts. Stelae proclaimed military victories in bilingual inscriptions, and a vibrant literary tradition began to take root. But history had other plans. The Mongols arrived like a storm from the grasslands, and with them came a linguistic erasure as thorough as it was violent. Genghis Khan's armies didn't just sack the Jin capital in 1234, they systematically dismantled the tools of its identity. Jurchen scribes were killed or dispersed, libraries burned, and the script itself was banned as a relic of a defeated people. What survives today are fragments, a handful of weathered stelae standing like silent sentinels in northeastern China, their inscriptions only partially deciphered. One tablet from 1185, discovered in a farmer's field in Heilongjiang, bears a poetic description of a royal hunt, its Jurchen characters interwoven with Chinese loanwords. Another, broken into 3 pieces, records a treaty between the Jin and Song dynasties, its diplomatic niceties frozen in untranslated stone. The tragedy of Jurchen script lies in what its silence obscures. This wasn't just a bureaucratic tool, it was the voice of a people transitioning from nomadic life to settled empire. Linguists have pieced together tantalizing clues. The script's characters for horse and bow retain the angular simplicity of step carvings, while terms for tax and governance borrow heavily from Chinese, reflecting the Jin's evolving identity. A single surviving manuscript page, tucked inside a Buddhist sutra, hints at a lost epic about Jurchen chieftains, its margins crammed with annotations that might have been a scholar's commentary or a student's notes. We'll never know. What makes this erasure particularly haunting is its echoes in later history. When the Manchus descendants of the Jurchen conquered China in the 17th century, they revived a modified version of the script, only to abandon it under pressure from Han Chinese bureaucracy. Today, fewer than a dozen scholars worldwide can read Jurchen, and the stelae that dot the Manchurian landscape speak in riddles. One inscription near Harbin, worn smooth by centuries of wind, is said to contain a Jurchen noble's lament about the fleeting nature of power. The words are just beyond our grasp, like whispers through a keyhole, audible but indistinct. Now we turn to a script that faced annihilation not by invasion, but by royal fiat. When King Sejong of Korea introduced Hangul in 1446, he called it a gift to the people, but his own elites saw it as a threat to their power. The battle over these deceptively simple letters reveals how scripts can become weapons in the struggle between privilege and progress. Pollard script wasn't just letters on a page, it was a lifeline carved into the margins of history. In the rugged highlands of southern China, where the Hmong people had preserved their oral traditions for centuries, a missionary named Samuel Pollard performed something radical in the early 1900s. He didn't impose the Latin alphabet or Chinese characters. Instead, he listened. Collaborating with Hmong intellectuals, he crafted a script tailored to the tonal melodies of their language, its geometric shapes mirroring the peaks and valleys of their homeland. The result was breathtakingly practical. Farmers could learn it in weeks, weaving its symbols into embroidery patterns or scratching them onto tree bark to record hymns. But when Mao's revolution swept through in the 1950s, this script wasn't just banned, it was branded as foreign subversion, its very existence a threat to the party's vision of uniformity. The crackdown was merciless. Schools teaching Pollard script were shuttered, printed materials burned, and practitioners sent to re-education camps. Yet in remote villages, the script found sanctuary. Hmong Christians, already accustomed to worshipping in secret, hid pages of scripture inside bamboo tubes buried beneath their homes. Mothers taught children to trace the symbols in ash by the hearth, wiping them away before dawn. The script's survival hinged on its adaptability. Some believers even incorporated its angular letters into traditional flower cloth designs, disguising sacred texts as folk art. One recovered hymn book from Giju province, its edges charred from a close call with red guards, contains marginal notes in Pollard script describing which verses to sing. When the wind howls at the door, a coded reference to raids. What emerges from these fragments is more than just linguistic resilience. It's a testament to faith's ability to outmaneuver oppression. The surviving hymns, passed down through whispers, blend Hmong animist imagery with Christian theology. One particularly haunting verse compares Christ's resurrection to the annual rebirth of the buckwheat crop, its melody echoing traditional planting chants. Another, smuggled out of China in the 1980s on a scrap of rice paper, adapts the Lord's Prayer to invoke the Spirit of the Sky alongside Jehovah, a theological bridge between worlds. These weren't mere translations, they were acts of cultural synthesis, proving that scripts carry more than words, they carry worldviews. The irony, Pollard script suppression only deepened its sacred aura. While Mao's government promoted simplified Chinese characters as tools of progress, underground congregations cherished their forbidden alphabet as a marker of identity. When the winds of political reform finally allowed the script to resurface in the 1990s, it wasn't as a relic but as a rallying point. Today, digitized versions flourish on Hmong language apps, and activists use it to document oral histories the revolution tried to erase. A single recovered catechism from Yunnan, its pages stained with mildew, bears a handwritten note in Pollard script. The ink fades, but the word stands. Now we turn to a script that faced annihilation not by decree, but by deliberate neglect. In the jungles of the Philippines, the Spanish called Baybayin, the devil's letters, but its true sin was proving that Southeast Asia had written histories long before colonizers arrived. Khitan large script wasn't just writing, it was the pulse of an empire that ruled from the grasslands to the Yellow River, its characters carved into stone stelae like frozen echoes of a vanished world. When the Liao dynasty rose in the 10th century, their Khitan rulers faced a challenge: how to govern a realm where nomadic horsemen and settled Chinese farmers needed to understand the same laws. Their solution, a script as hybrid as their empire, part logographic like Chinese, part phonetic like the Uyghur alphabet they borrowed from Silk Road traders. But here's the twist: by the time Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty 3 centuries later, this once powerful writing system had been deliberately buried, its monuments toppled, its scribes silenced. Only scattered fragments survive, leaving linguists to piece together a puzzle missing most of its pieces. What makes Khitan's erasure so deliberate is the way it mirrors the steppe's cyclical conquests. Kublai Khan didn't just reject the script, he replaced it with the new Fags-Pa alphabet, a tool for unifying his multicultural empire under Mongol rule. Overnight, Khitan became obsolete, its stelae repurposed as bridgestones or ground into mortar. The few surviving inscriptions, like the hauntingly beautiful epitaph for Emperor Xingzong, read like messages in a bottle, proud declarations of a dynasty that knew its words would outlast its rule. One particularly poignant fragment lists the 9 virtues of Khitan leadership, including a line about holding the bow and the brush with equal honor, a philosophy that balanced martial might with civil administration. Deciphering even these scraps has been a feat of modern ingenuity. Unlike Chinese, Khitan large script used characters that could represent both whole words and syllables, creating a fluid system that adapted to the rhythms of spoken Khitan. A single stele discovered in Inner Mongolia in 1982 contains over 3,000 characters, its text weaving military victories with poetic descriptions of migrating cranes, suggesting a literary tradition far richer than historians assumed. But the true loss lies in what we can't recover. Temple inventories hint at vast archives of legal codes and epic poetry, all burned when Yuan troops sacked the Liao's northern capitals. The script's ghost lingers in unexpected places. Modern Mongolian still uses Khitan loanwords for concepts like justice and treaty, linguistic fossils of a bureaucratic system the Mongols absorbed even as they erased its written form. More tantalizing are the similarities between Khitan characters and elements of Japan's hiragana. Did wandering monks carry fragments of this script across the sea? The answer may lie buried in the archives of Kyoto's temples, where medieval scholars collected barbarian writings as curiosities. Now we turn to a script deemed heretical not for its letters but for the truths it carried. When the Catholic Church declared the Cathar faith a heresy in 13th century France, they didn't just burn believers. They incinerated every Occitan language text they could find, erasing a dissident vision of Christianity from the record. The parchment scraps that survived tell a story far more dangerous than any crusader's sword. Old Permic script wasn't just an alphabet, it was a cultural crossroads etched into birch bark and bone. In the 14th century, a Russian missionary named Stephen of Perm ventured into the dense forests of the Komi people, armed not with a sword but with a revolutionary idea. Instead of imposing the Cyrillic script of his own faith, he crafted an entirely new writing system tailored to the Komi language, its angular letters mirroring the tribal totems and runes of the people he sought to convert. On the surface, it was an act of respect, a bridge between worlds, but beneath that goodwill lay a quieter violence. Each stroke of Stephen's pen overwrote a pagan tradition centuries older than the Gospels. The Komi weren't illiterate before Stephen's arrival. Their history lived in the intricate carvings on ritual staffs and the patterns woven into sacred textiles. These symbols, some resembling bears, others the antlers of the reindeer they herded, were more than decoration. They mapped the movements of stars, recorded treaties between clans, and invoked the forest spirits the Komi called voiva. When Stephen repurposed these shapes into letters for his Christian texts, he wasn't just teaching the Komi to read scripture, he was rewriting their relationship with the natural world. A rune that once summoned the river's guardian became the letter O umlaut, stripped of its magic. The curling symbol for the sacred birch tree now stood for V, a neutral sound in hymns praising a foreign god. For a brief moment, Old Permic thrived. Komi children learned to read in their mother tongue, and the script even appeared on coins minted in Moscow, a rare acknowledgement of indigenous literacy in medieval Europe. But the Russian Orthodox Church's tolerance had limits. By the 16th century, church authorities declared Old Permic confusing and unnecessary, banning it in favor of Cyrillic. The real reason, Old Permic had become a vessel for something dangerous: syncretism. Marginal notes in surviving psalters reveal how Komi converts smuggled pagan incantations into Christian prayers, whispering to their old gods beneath the veneer of orthodoxy. One crumbling manuscript from 1492 contains a hymn to the Virgin Mary, but hidden in its vowel markers are the symbols for Yoma, the Komi earth goddess, cleverly disguised as decorative flourishes. The script's erasure was a slow suffocation. Without official patronage, scribes stopped teaching it, and the birch bark pages of Komi lore crumbled into the soil. Today, only a handful of inscriptions survive, like the enigmatic Ust Vim Chronicle, where Old Permic letters trail off mid-sentence, as if the writer was interrupted mid-thought. Linguists have managed to reconstruct about half the alphabet, but the cultural context is irreparably fractured. We know the Komi used their script to record epic poems about the hero Kadam Osh, who could speak with wolves, yet not a single full verse survives. What makes Old Permic's loss especially haunting is its duality. Unlike scripts burned by conquerors or lost to time, this was a writing system deliberately created to uplift and inadvertently used to erase. Stephen of Perm, now a saint, is celebrated for his ingenuity, but the Komi's pre-Christian wisdom survives only in fragments. A carved amulet here, a folk song there, its original words half remembered. The script's fate mirrors that of the Wampanoag's written language in colonial America, another well-intentioned missionary project that ultimately served assimilation. Now we turn to a script that vanished not by decree, but by the slow erosion of memory. In the marshlands of Iraq, the Mandeans' delicate scrolls of Gnostic wisdom faced a different threat, not fire but the rising waters of time. Proto-Sinaitic script didn't just appear, it erupted onto the scene like a revolution in stone. Around 1800 BC, Canaanite laborers toiling in Egypt's turquoise mines did something extraordinary. They took the elegant hieroglyphs surrounding them, symbols reserved for pharaohs and gods, and stripped them down to their bare bones. A simplified ox head became Aleph, the precursor to our A. A wavy water glyph morphed into Mem, the ancestor of M. This wasn't just borrowing, it was linguistic alchemy, transforming pictographs into pure sound. The genius lay in its economy. Where Egyptian scribes needed hundreds of symbols, these miners crafted an alphabet with fewer than 30. Overnight, writing wasn't just for elites chiseling tombs, it was for merchants tallying shipments, soldiers sending dispatches, lovers scratching promises onto shards of pottery. Yet for all its world-shaking innovation, Proto-Sinaitic vanished so completely that scholars only recognized its fragments in 1905. The reason? Its very adaptability became its undoing. As traders carried this script across the Mediterranean, each culture adapted it further. Phoenicians streamlined the shapes, Greeks added vowels, Romans squared the curves into capitals. Like a river delta branching into countless streams, the original source became obscured by its own descendants. The irony is exquisite. The script that birthed nearly every modern alphabet left no monuments to itself, no grand libraries boasting of its origins. Its legacy is everywhere and nowhere, like the blueprint of a house rebuilt so many times the first draft was forgotten. What's haunting is how close we came to never knowing it existed. The Sinai inscriptions that revealed Proto-Sinaitic weren't found in a royal archive but scrawled near mine shafts, often alongside crude drawings of gods and goats. One particularly poignant carving shows a miner's plea to the goddess Hathor. May the turquoise be plentiful. The letters are shaky, the grammar imperfect, proof that this wasn't scribble work but the raw voice of everyday people. Had those desert winds eroded just a few millimeters deeper, we might never have traced our ABCs back to these desperate, hopeful marks. Now consider the counterpoint. While Proto-Sinaitic faded, its offspring conquered the world. Phoenician merchants spread it from Tyre to Carthage, where it financed empires. The Greeks wove it into epics that defined Western thought. Even the Arabic and Hebrew scripts branching from this root became vessels for sacred texts that shaped civilizations. Yet the original inventors, those Canaanite miners, received no credit, their names erased by time. It's a pattern we've seen before. The most transformative ideas often dissolve into the currents they create, their origins blurred by their own success. The script's ghost lingers in unexpected places. Next time you type an O, notice its perfect circle, a direct descendant of the Proto-Sinaitic I glyph, Ayin. The letter B still carries the swollen belly of its ancestor, Bet, meaning house. These aren't just letters, they're fossils of a 4,000-year-old rebellion against complexity, a testament to the power of simplicity. And perhaps that's why empires couldn't suppress Proto-Sinaitic as they did so many other scripts. It was too fluid, too adaptable, too radically democratic to be pinned down. Like water, it slipped through the fingers of those who might have sought to control it, nourishing everything in its path without claiming a single monument for itself. Now we turn to a script that faced the opposite fate, not evolution but erasure. When European colonizers encountered the Cherokee syllabary, they didn't see an intellectual marvel, they saw a threat that had to be destroyed. The story of Sequoia's letters reveals how some scripts are too powerful to ignore and too dangerous to allow. Vai Script wasn't just letters, it was the ocean's rhythm carved into palm leaves. In the early 20th century, on a tiny atoll in Micronesia's Caroline Islands, a man named Chief Rongorongo performed something extraordinary. Watching European traders and Japanese officials arrive with their foreign alphabets, he dreamed a script that would mirror his people's own tongue. Using shells to etch symbols into coral slabs, he crafted a syllabary as fluid as the tides, each character representing a syllable of the Wolai language. Picture this: fishermen recording lunar cycles on fronds, mothers teaching children to trace wave-like characters in the sand, elders preserving genealogies that stretched back to the first canoe landings. This wasn't just writing, it was a declaration that small islands could hold vast knowledge. Then the empires came. Japanese colonizers in 1914 saw the script as a threat to their assimilation policies, banning its use in favor of katakana. When American forces took control after World War II, English became the language of progress, and Wolai was dismissed as primitive scratches. Schools punished children for writing in their native script, while missionaries insisted God's word could only be properly understood in Roman letters. The effect was devastating, like a tsunami washing away footprints in the sand. Within 2 generations, the script survived only in the trembling hands of elders, their memories fading like ink on sun-bleached parchment. What vanished with those strokes? Not just words, but an entire way of navigating the world. Wolai's symbols encoded celestial knowledge star paths for open ocean navigation, mnemonic chants for predicting typhoon seasons. One recovered leaf, now preserved behind glass in a Honolulu museum, shows a spiral of characters mapping the migration patterns of frigate birds, a natural compass for lost voyagers. Another fragment, rescued from a crumbling missionary diary, contains a healer's recipe for stingray venom, its ingredients described in Wolai's looping glyphs alongside sketches of coral and coconut. These weren't just records, they were lifelines honed over centuries of island survival. The script's fragility reveals a cruel paradox of linguistic preservation. Unlike robust clay tablets or stone stelae, Wolai was written on organic materials: palm leaves, bark cloth, even smooth sections of giant clam shells. Perfect for a tropical climate where permanence meant adaptability, but disastrous when colonizers burned pagan texts or humidity silently devoured family archives. Today, linguists race against time, interviewing the last 3 fluent readers, their voices crackling in digital recordings. One elder's shaky drawing of a fish-shaped glyph triggers a breakthrough. It's not just the word for tuna, but a homophone meaning to stitch together, revealing the script's poetic layers. Now we turn from slow erosion to violent rupture. When the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace in 1917, they brought more than revolution, they brought a crusade against the old world's letters. The story of how Cyrillic became the Soviet hammer against minority scripts is one of ideological warfare inked in blood and propaganda. Nüshu wasn't just a script, it was a whisper woven into fabric, a secret pact between generations of women who refused to be silenced. In the remote villages of Zhongyong County, China, for centuries, mothers taught their daughters this delicate, cursive script in the dim light of oil lamps, away from the ears of men. Its characters, slender as willow leaves, curved like embroidery stitches, were designed to be disguised as decorative patterns on fans and handkerchiefs. To the uninitiated, they were mere ornamentation, but to the women of Zhongyong, they were lifelines carrying lullabies for stillborn children, grievances against cruel in-laws, and coded warnings about marriages that felt like prisons. This wasn't just writing, it was a subterranean network of emotion, a language where sisterhood wasn't a metaphor but a survival strategy. The Cultural Revolution didn't just target Nüshu, it sought to eradicate the very idea that women could possess a world beyond their assigned roles. Red Guards stormed homes, burning embroidered letters and tearing apart quilts stitched with poems. They called it feudal superstition, but the real crime was its autonomy. Unlike state-approved Mandarin, Nüshu had no rigid rules, no imperial seal. It flowed freely between women, adapting to their needs, a love letter one day, a funeral dirge the next. The most heartbreaking losses, the third-day books, secret journals gifted to brides 3 days after their weddings, filled with advice from female kin. They contained everything a young wife couldn't say aloud: how to navigate a husband's temper, which herbs could prevent pregnancy, even the names of sympathetic widows who might offer shelter. These weren't just texts, they were maps of a parallel society. What makes Nüshu's suppression especially cruel is how it weaponized intimacy. The script thrived precisely because it was private, shared between sworn sisters, mothers, and daughters, women exchanging folded notes under the guise of passing thread. When outsiders demanded translations, the women lied, claiming the characters were meaningless doodles. But during the Cultural Revolution, even this subterfuge collapsed. Neighbors denounced neighbors, daughters were pressured to expose their mothers' counter-revolutionary writings, and entire lineages of knowledge turned to ash. The few surviving artifacts, a fan hidden in a roof beam, a sash tucked inside a burial jar, hint at the vast emotional archive that vanished. Yet fragments persist, clinging to life like wildflowers in cracked pavement. In the 1980s, an elderly woman named Yong Huane emerged as the last fluent Nüshu writer, her memory a fragile bridge to the past. Before her death in 2004, she dictated poems to linguists, their lyrics revealing a world where women compared themselves to lotuses rooted in mud, beautiful but suffocating. Today, scholars and feminists laboriously reconstruct the script from these shards, while artists reimagine its curves in installations protesting gender violence. But the true legacy of Nüshu lies in its paradox. A script born from oppression became a tool of defiance, proving that even the most marginalized voices leave echoes. Now we cross oceans to a script that faced erasure not by revolution but by colonial greed. When the British encountered the Vai syllabary in 19th century Liberia, they didn't see ingenuity, they saw a threat to their civilizing mission. The story of how Vai survived reveals another kind of resistance, one that weaponized literacy itself. Mandom's script isn't just letters on a chalkboard. It's a revolution unfolding in real time. In 1978, a Congolese man named Webladio Pei woke from a dream with symbols flashing behind his eyelids. What emerged was a writing system unlike any other, its characters resembling the geometric patterns of Cuba textiles and the angular logic of mathematical equations. Within years, Mandom, for the blacks, spread across classrooms in the Democratic Republic of Congo, its modular shapes allowing speakers to write not just Lingala or Swahili, but hundreds of African languages with startling efficiency. The genius lies in its design. Rotate a basic shape 90 degrees, and it becomes a new syllable. 5 core symbols generate thousands of combinations, a linguistic kaleidoscope reflecting Africa's diversity. Yet the script's greatest strength became its battleground. Francophone elites dismissed Mandom as backward, clinging to French as the language of power and prestige. Colonial mindset runs deep. Generations taught that sophistication arrives in European packaging. Government offices refuse documents written in Mandom. Universities prioritize research in French or English. The irony cuts deep. A continent that birthed humanity's oldest writing systems now fights to validate its newest. But in the crowded classrooms of Kinshasa, children trace Mandom's zigzagging letters with fingers sticky with mango juice, their notebooks filled with stories colonial curricula never allowed. What's at stake isn't just literacy, it's sovereignty. Mandom offers something keyboards can't, a script that dances to the rhythm of African phonetics. French stumbles over the clicks of Xhosa or the tonal melodies of Yoruba, forcing speakers to contort their tongues to fit foreign letters. Mandan bends instead to the speaker, its symbols fluid enough to capture nuances lost in translation. One teacher in Brazzaville demonstrates by writing the word Ubuntu in both French and Mandan, the latter's interconnected glyphs visually echoing the philosophy of shared humanity. The script's survival hinges on guerrilla education. Volunteer instructors host clandestine workshops in church basements, their textbooks photocopied on creaky machines. Street artists spray paint Mandan murals depicting Patrus Lumumba and ancient Congo kings, reclaiming public space as a canvas for linguistic resistance. Even technology has become an unlikely ally. Apps like Mandan Keyboard let users text in the script, while YouTube tutorials reach diaspora communities from Brussels to Brooklyn. This struggle mirrors a continent-wide reckoning. Just as Nsibidi script resurfaces in Nigerian classrooms and Tifinog gains official status in Morocco, Mandan challenges the lie that Africa's future must be written in imported letters. Its fate now rests with a generation too young to remember colonization, but old enough to question why progress still wears a European face. The lesson here isn't just about letters, it's about who gets to decide what knowledge looks like. Balinese script doesn't just adorn temple walls, it breathes with the whispers of gods and ancestors. For centuries, this flowing, curvilinear script etched prayers onto palm leaf manuscripts called lonta, recording everything from Hindu epics to intricate irrigation laws that shaped Bali's terraced rice fields. But walk the streets of Denpasar today, and you'll see a different story unfolding. Neon signs blaze in Indonesian and English, while smartphones thumb out messages in Latin letters. The script that once channeled divine wisdom now fights for relevance, preserved mostly by priests and aging scribes who fear their sacred inkwells will run dry. The erosion of Balinese script reveals a quiet tragedy. Globalization doesn't always burn books. Sometimes it just lets them gather dust. Unlike colonial bans or Stalinist purges, this loss is driven by pragmatism. Schools prioritize Indonesian for national exams, businesses demand English for tourism, and even Balinese parents worry their children will fall behind if they spend hours mastering the script's 47 intricate characters. Yet what slips away isn't just aesthetics, it's an entire cosmology. Balinese letters aren't neutral shapes, they're vessels of Taksu, divine energy. The letter Ang embodies Vishnu's stability, while Da resonates with the earth's fertility. When a priest chants a mantra, the script's visual form is believed to amplify its power, like a musical score for the soul. Temples like Pura Besaki still safeguard manuscripts filled with Kakawin poetry, where every syllable aligns with musical meter and spiritual symbolism. One fragile lonta might contain agricultural calendars tied to lunar cycles, sandwiched between hymns to the rice goddess Dewi Sri. Another could detail Yuzada healing rituals, their herbal remedies diagrammed in script that curls like vine tendrils. But fewer young Balinese can read them, relying instead on Indonesian translations that flatten the layered wordplay like studying Shakespeare through spark notes. The irony, Bali's cultural allure, marketed to tourists as timeless, hinges on traditions now endangered by the very economy they sustain. Efforts to revive the script walk a tightrope between preservation and performative nostalgia. Workshops teach calligraphy to curious foreigners, while gamelan ensembles incorporate projected Balinese lyrics for Instagram-friendly performances. Purists argue this dilutes the script's sacredness, turning it into decor rather than a living practice. Yet in hidden corners, resistance flickers. Teenagers text in Balinese script using custom fonts. Tattoo artists ink sacred syllables onto skin, and underground punk bands scrawl lyrics in defiant glyphs. Their message is clear. A script isn't just a tool, it's a rebellion against cultural amnesia. Now we turn from slow erosion to violent rupture. When Serbian forces besieged Sarajevo in the 1990s, they didn't just target people, they aimed at memory itself. The story of Bosnia's Arabic script reveals how war burns more than buildings. It incinerates the very words that bind a people to their past. Sumerian cuneiform wasn't just humanity's first writing. It was a revolution pressed into wet clay with the end of a reed. Imagine the moment when some anonymous scribe in Uruk, around 3200 BCE, realized those simple pictographs of barley and oxen could do more than tally taxes, they could capture speech itself. For centuries, these wedge-shaped marks recorded everything from royal decrees to beer recipes, building the world's first literary tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, hymns to goddesses, even early medical texts describing seizures as the hand of a ghost, all flowed from these intricate impressions. But when the Akkadian Empire rose in 2300 BCE, they didn't just conquer Sumer politically, they buried its language alive. The silencing of Sumerian reveals a brutal truth about cultural dominance. Akkadian rulers didn't erase cuneiform, they repurposed it, like a conqueror moving into a defeated king's palace. Scribes continued pressing wedges into clay, but now the symbols represented Akkadian words. Sumerian became a liturgical relic, preserved only by priests chanting dead phrases they no longer understood. Think about the irony. The very writing system Sumerians invented to immortalize their thoughts became a cage for their voice. School children in Babylon copied Sumerian vocabulary, lists like fossils in a museum, mouthing sounds divorced from meaning. What haunts scholars isn't just the loss of language, but the evaporation of thought. Cuneiform tablets preserve breathtaking innovations, the base 60 math system that gives us 60-minute hours, legal codes predating Hammurabi by centuries, even the first recorded joke, a crude quip about a dog walking into a tavern. But these are fragments of a conversation we can barely overhear. Consider the Lament for a poem mourning the city's destruction. We can translate its metaphors about walls gaping like corpses, but what nuances vanished when the living thread to Sumerian poets snapped? The word for freedom, amagi, literally meant return to mother, a cultural concept we can define but never fully feel. The most tragic losses may be the ordinary ones. Among the hundreds of thousands of surviving tablets are school exercises where children practiced cuneiform by writing proverbs. One reads, "A scribe whose hand can keep up with his mouth, that's a real scribe." The line between the lines, generations of teachers passing down not just technique but pride in craft. When Akkadian replaced Sumerian, that unbroken chain of mentorship fractured. Later scribes could copy the strokes perfectly, but the living culture behind them, the inside jokes, the stylistic flourishes, the shared reverence for the written word turned to dust. Yet Sumerian's ghost lingers in unexpected places. That base 60 math still shapes how we measure circles and count seconds. The word alcohol traces back to the Sumerian al-kuhal, a term for refined oils. Even the structure of cuneiform, where symbols could represent objects, sounds, or concepts, anticipates modern emoji by 5 millennia, the script's final irony. It outlasted the empires that sought to control it. When archaeologists unearthed the library of Ashurbanipal in the 19th century, they found thousands of tablets preserving Sumerian lore collected by an Assyrian king who couldn't read them but recognized their power. Now we reach our final forbidden script, one that refused to die quietly. From the mountains of Ethiopia comes Ge'ez, a language frozen in liturgy but thawing into rebellion. Its story isn't just about loss but resurrection. Voynich manuscript isn't just an unreadable book, it's a mirror held up to the limits of human understanding. Dated to the early 15th century, its pages brim with botanical illustrations of plants that don't exist, astrological charts defying known systems, and hundreds of delicate female figures bathing in emerald green liquid. But the real mystery lies in its script, flowing, alien characters that form no recognizable language, yet follow patterns too structured to be random gibberish. For over 6 centuries, cryptographers, linguists, and even wartime codebreakers have thrown themselves at its pages, only to walk away empty-handed. The question isn't just what it says, it's why someone went to such lengths to create a text nobody could read. One theory suggests the manuscript was a forbidden archive of arcane knowledge. Its herbal section, filled with fantastical roots and leaves, might depict alchemical recipes too dangerous to record in plain text. During the Renaissance, the line between botany and heresy was thin. A plant labeled demon's trumpet or virgin's milk could land a scholar in the Inquisition's grip. The Voynich's cipher may have been a survival tactic, wrapping dangerous ideas in a linguistic labyrinth. Yet even this explanation falters under scrutiny. If the book held alchemical secrets, why include pages upon pages of naked women in tubes? If it was medical, why the nonsensical star charts? Every hypothesis collapses into more questions. The hoax theory, too, has its defenders. Could it be an elaborate Renaissance-era prank, a mad scribe's joke on future generations? The manuscript's vellum has been carbon-dated, its ink analyzed, it's unquestionably medieval. But the idea of a medieval con artist crafting 240 painstakingly illustrated pages just to baffle posterity feels almost as fantastical as the book's content. The more compelling twist, the Voynich might be both a hoax and a cipher. History is littered with tongue-in-cheek occult textbooks like the Ripley Scrolls, which mixed genuine alchemy with theatrical nonsense to confound the uninitiated. Was the Voynich a test, its true message visible only to those who knew which pages to ignore? Modern technology has only deepened the enigma. In 2014, statistical analysis revealed the script follows linguistic rules found in real languages, word frequency, syllable patterns, yet matches no known tongue. AI decoders spit out fragments of mangled Hebrew or Proto-Romance, but never coherence. The most haunting possibility, that the manuscript was successfully decoded centuries ago, its key lost to some forgotten library fire or unmarked grave. Imagine a scholar in 1520 holding the cipher, chuckling at its herbal jokes, only to take the secret to their tomb. What makes the Voynich uniquely tragic isn't its indecipherability, it's the glimpse it offers of knowledge teetering on the edge of recovery. Unlike scripts burned by conquerors or erased by time, this one sits right there, whispering just beyond comprehension. Its very existence mocks our assumption that history's secrets will eventually yield. Perhaps that's why it captivates us. In a world where we've mapped genomes and decoded ancient DNA, the Voynich remains a stubborn pocket of darkness, proof that some doors stay locked no matter how hard we rattle the handle. Now, as we close this journey through silenced scripts, let's pause at the threshold of a deeper question. When a language vanishes, what precisely do we lose? Not just words, but the way those words shaped thought itself. The methods empires used to silence languages follow a pattern as precise as it is brutal. First comes the destruction of physical texts, whether it's Spanish priests tossing Mayan codices into bonfires or Stalin's officials incinerating Crimean Tatar poetry. Fire isn't chosen at random, it's a calculated act. A burned book can't be copied, a melted wax tablet can't be read aloud, but the violence doesn't stop there. Next, the conquerors imposed their own script, weaponizing education. Colonial schools from Canada to Cambodia punished children for writing in their mother tongues, washing out mouths with soap or severing fingers, literal and symbolic severing of cultural transmission. The message is clear: your words are not just worthless, they're dangerous. Yet the most insidious tactic isn't outright bans, it's bureaucratic erasure. When France mandated French in Algerian schools or Japan outlawed Korean in occupied territories, they didn't just replace alphabets, they rewrote social hierarchies. Suddenly, a farmer's contract in his own script was invalid in court. A grandmother's lullabies became backward compared to state-approved textbooks. This isn't merely linguistic change. It's psychological warfare, making people complicit in their own silencing. The British in India took it further, dismissing local scripts as primitive, while plundering Sanskrit manuscripts to fuel Orientalist studies, a paradox where the conqueror both destroys and exoticizes the very culture he suppresses. What's startling is how these strategies echo across millennia. The Assyrians didn't just impose Akkadian. They built libraries to curate acceptable knowledge, just as European colonists preserved indigenous artifacts in museums while outlawing their living use. The Romans didn't merely adopt Greek letters, they co-opted Etruscan religious symbols, hollowing them of meaning until they became decorative flourishes on triumphal arches. Linguistic oppression isn't about ignorance, it's about control. A people who lose their script don't just forget their prayers or poems, they lose the framework to articulate dissent. But here's where the pattern fractures. For every empire that tried to erase a script, there were scribes who buried clay tablets, mothers who stitched forbidden letters into quilts, children who whispered rhymes in hidden cellars. The Manchus outlawed Mongolian script, yet Buddhist monks preserved it in temple murals. The Spanish burned Nahuatl texts, but indigenous scribes repurposed Latin letters to record their own histories, a subversive act of linguistic alchemy. Even today, when China suppresses Uyghur language apps or Turkey restricts Kurdish media, underground networks thrive. A smartphone becomes a digital cave wall, an emoji a coded rune. The stakes now are both dire and hopeful. Of the world's 7,000 languages, nearly half are endangered not by natural evolution, but by policies that mirror ancient playbooks. Yet revival movements are writing a counter-narrative. In Wales, road signs now bear Welsh first, English second. In Hawaii, immersion schools resurrect Alilo Hawaii, once banned by American settlers. These aren't nostalgic gestures, they're acts of defiance. When a Cherokee teenager texts in syllabary or a Berber activist tweets in Tifinog, they're doing what the scribes of Ugarit or the Ek Society of Nigeria did, proving that scripts aren't relics but lifelines. The battle isn't between ink and fire, it's between memory and oblivion, and memory, as these resilient voices show, has a way of outliving empires. These forbidden scripts are more than relics of the past. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's deepest struggles for identity and power. When a language is erased, it's not just words that vanish. Entire philosophies dissolve, like the Mayan understanding of time as a spiral rather than a straight line, or the Nüshu women's coded expressions of solidarity against oppression. Each of these 33 scripts carried unique visions of existence that threatened empires precisely because they offered alternatives to hierarchy, to control, to the very way reality was defined. The Assyrians feared Aramaic's unifying power across diverse communities. Stalin saw minority languages as seeds of rebellion. Colonizers burned African scripts because they recognized them as blueprints for societies built on different values. But here's what the destroyers underestimated. Scripts have a way of outliving their suppressors. Like the Cherokee syllabary, resurrected in digital spaces after generations of forced assimilation. Or Tifinog, once banned under French rule, now emblazoned on protest signs across North Africa. These aren't just comebacks, they're revolutions in slow motion, proving that cultural memory can lie dormant for centuries before finding fertile ground again. The Bamum script of Cameroon, nearly eradicated by German colonizers, is now taught in underground schools, its symbols repurposed as emblems of resistance. Even the hauntingly undeciphered Rongorongo of Easter Island stirs new investigations as indigenous scholars collaborate with computer scientists to crack its code. The urgency to reclaim these scripts isn't about nostalgia, it's about survival. Climate change threatens island nations' oral traditions. Globalization homogenizes dialects at unprecedented speeds. Yet in the face of this, we're witnessing something extraordinary. Mobile apps teach Coptic to Egyptian youth. Instagram influencers popularize Baybayin calligraphy in the Philippines. The very technologies that accelerate cultural erosion are becoming tools of revival. This paradoxical truth gives hope. While empires once controlled knowledge through physical monopolies, burning books, silencing scribes, digital age makes suppression infinitely harder. A script saved to the cloud, a pronunciation preserved in a viral video, can circle the globe faster than any Inquisition's edict. What we stand to lose isn't merely linguistic diversity, but cognitive diversity, the very capacity to think differently. The Inuit language's multitude of words for snow encode environmental wisdom crucial in a warming Arctic. The grammatical structures of Australian Aboriginal languages, which orient everything in relation to landscape rather than ego-centric coordinates, offer radical models for ecological thinking. When these vanish, humanity's intellectual toolkit shrinks. The fight for scripts is ultimately a fight for the right to imagine alternatives, to empire, to exploitation, to extinction. So the question isn't just which scripts will rise again, but which we'll collectively choose to champion. Will the next decade see a breakthrough in deciphering Harappan symbols, unlocking 4,000-year-old urban wisdom? Could blockchain technology preserve vulnerable scripts in immutable digital archives? The answers depend on recognizing linguistic diversity not as a curiosity, but as vital as biodiversity. Every time a child learns a once-banned alphabet, they're not just memorizing letters, they're inheriting a revolution. Press subscribe to join this ongoing excavation of silenced histories, where every like and share becomes an act of defiance against forgetting. The comment section awaits your voice. Which of these scripts resonates most with you and why? Let's make sure no alphabet ever becomes forbidden.